carry on and plan the sequel. Because let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel.
And welcome back to Micro Queers. It's our sporadic queer horror movie review roundup thing. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and I don't think Joe ever says the same thing during that introduction on a Micro Queers.
Never ever.
But yes, everyone, we are discussing I don't want to say an unheard of film, because we've definitely had people mention this to us.
Sure.
I actually think it was Patrick from Kill by Kill, like way back in the first year of our show. But
yes, him and Liz Purcell are guest on Dress to Kill.
Yes, but everyone, I haven't even said the name of the movie. We are discussing Gordon Willis's 1980 film Windows, which is kind of a prototype for single white female.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this is interesting, right? Like, we're talking about a film that's celebrating its 45th anniversary. And I mean, I think in certain ways it's extremely dated, and in other ways it feels like a queer horror benchmark, right? Like,
yes.
Considering the 1980s time period, we did this kind of shit a lot.
Yes. And I mean, it also not, well, maybe it is coincidental, but like it does come out the same year as William Friedkin's Cruising. So I find it very interesting that in 1980 we have, Cruising is like, oh, like the gay one that's very problematic. And this is the lesbian one that's very problematic.
Yes. So folks, we are also going to give a content warning. If you do seek this film out, be advised that it immediately begins with a sexual assault. And then we also have a cat that dies.
I'm going to be a little pedantic, and not because I'm challenging you. I'm just actually genuinely curious. Like, yes, this is
the sexual assault.
Well, because it is definitely a sexual assault because of just like what he's doing. But there's not any actual penetration in this scene, correct?
No, it's definitely implied. We do learn that he forces the main character to remove her top, but we don't see it. And yeah, it's one of those things where I found it extremely upsetting, but upon reflection, I realized we're actually not seeing much. It's just very well executed in a very threatening way.
I agree. This is a movie where I just kept going back and forth. Like, I knew walking in the problematic nature of the film, so that was kind of like a thing where I was like, okay, like whatever. Like,
okay, so I didn't, by the way. Okay. Yeah, like I went into this thinking that this was going to be, and folks, you'll probably hear us make this comparison more than once. I thought this was going to be the theatrical version of Somebody's Watching Me! !
Oh, yeah. Okay, yes. Because Single by Female, I guess, is maybe kind of an apt comparison, but this has a lot in common with John Carpenter's Someone's Watching Me. It's weird because I found there were times where I was like, okay, I feel like if this dipped its toes into exploitation, it might be a little bit more exciting, because I do think there are some pacing issues in this film.
It's a little boring at times, yeah.
But at the same time, like what you said, like the opening sexual assault is very upsetting, despite the fact that we're not really seeing that much. And I would argue this also adds into the climax, which is a lot of silhouettes of our two leads.
Yeah, I mean, we should know, you said that this is director Gordon Willis. It's his one and only directorial credit, because he is mostly well known for being the director of photography for like pretty much every well-regarded famous movie from like Woody Allen or Francis Ford Coppola in the 80s.
I'm also seeing the original All the President's Men. Okay, total aside, but like I've been screening a lot of movies, for my Alamo screenings, and the writer of All the President's Men is William Goldman, and he won an Oscar for that film, as well as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But he also wrote the novel and the script adaptation of The Princess Bride, as well as the adaptation of Misery. But he also wrote, get this, the adaptation of Stephen King's Dreamcatcher.
Oh my God.
Anyway, so continuing my thought from earlier, though, like there were parts of this where I was like, oh, like it feels like it wants to dip into exploitation, but then the parts where it's more quote unquote classy, I thought were really well done.
Yes.
And so they were just two different movies in here that I thought were at odds with each other a little bit.
Yeah, the subject matter feels like it is really treading that line. Like sometimes it dips more into exploitation territory. Sometimes it's, just kind of a classy 80s thriller. But the movie always looks great. So even when it's a little bit boring, it's a marvel to look at.
Yeah, so it's not surprising that this is a DP directing this film.
Yeah, and apparently he directed the film, realized that he didn't enjoy being a director, and that's why it's his one and only credit. But it's interesting. Like, we're going to step you through this a little bit more than we normally would with a micro quiz, in part because this is a bit of an older film. It's harder to track down depending on what country you're in. Like, this is not available for streaming here in Canada, but it is widely available in the US.
Yeah, well, kind of. The only two streaming services at this time that I could watch this on were either Fubo, which is, I believe, a sports streaming channel, and MGM Plus, which I had to sign up for a 7-day free trial.
Okay. See, I thought you were going to go with that Fubo thing, because isn't that just like a wannabe Tubi Plex, whatever?
So it costs money, though, and apparently I already made an account for something else, and I couldn't do their 7-day free trial.
You know what, folks? It's always about making a new email account and then creating a new free trial.
I already have 3 email accounts. Anyway, okay, so before we kind of go through the plot, Joe, recommending this?
I would recommend this. It's a bit of a curiosity. Yeah. As I said, I didn't really know where this was going to go, so there were a couple of pretty big swings that were unexpected for me. But overall, it's like not even that long a film. So if you have access to it, it's worth your time. Yeah,
it's like 94 minutes. I would recommend this. I think I find this more of a fascinating film than a good film, but on that level alone, I would recommend it. And I'll remember this. I mean, again, I think that Someone's Watching Me and Cruising are both more memorable films, but slight recommend on the I'm sorry, I will slightly remember this movie.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I feel like if for nothing else, I'm going to remember Elizabeth Ashley's performance as, spoiler alert, folks, the villain of this piece. So playing the I mean, this has got to be one of the quintessential predatory lesbians.
I mean, she goes to some lengths to get this woman into her bed, and to the point where I was constantly asking myself, like, what does she expect is going to happen? And I know what she expects is going to happen, but like, in no world would I ever see this woman, Emily, played by Talia Shire, like falling in love with Andrea.
No. This is undiagnosed mental illness masquerading as problematic lesbian character.
And she does not have a great therapist.
Oh my God. I mean, that guy deserved to die.
Which we don't even see it happen.
No. But that's fine, because classy.
Well, and that's the thing. I think this movie's really trying to distance itself from the horror genre, because remember, at this year, I mean, we have slasher movies coming out like at the wazoo.
All the time. Yeah. Okay, so as you mentioned, yes, the film concerns Emily Hollander, who is played by Talia Shire, and it's interesting because the way the film opens, it's very much, look at this woman. She is in New York City. She has an ex-husband, so immediately you're kind of red flagging him in case something happens. But she is seen walking through a number of isolated and or dark areas. And I just think, okay, so this is setting it up as where is something going to happen to her, not when or if.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, we have a couple scenes of her walking around with groceries down the streets of New York, right? Yes, New York. And then she walks into her apartment and is immediately assaulted by a man who is already waiting inside there for her.
Yeah, so I thought that was not subversive, but a little bit unexpected, because I definitely kept thinking the attack was going to happen earlier, because we obviously know something's about to happen.
Oh, yeah.
But this attack, it's immediate. Like, you basically barely get a moment into the film, and then we're in the thick of it with her. I think the other thing, it's not super showy, but it is sustained. So we have to watch him pin her down. He's putting a switchblade knife into her mouth, and he's making her record audio for a cassette tape he's making. And it's so upsetting.
And we do cut back to the assailant, but I think a lot of this is focused on Talia Shire's face, which I think is a smart move. And
agreed.
Because I could see another version of this where it's, again, just a bit more exploitative.
Yeah, like, you could show more things that he's doing, but I don't think it's necessary, because we can gather how bad this is.
And Shire is good. Like, she really sells this. I do wish, as a character overall, Emily was a bit more... at the risk of throwing the word agency, right? I wish she had a bit more agency, but because we also give her a disability in that she is a stutterer in this movie.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Does this pay off well enough? Because this is definitely, one of these women in danger movies, but then you add on to it by saying, oh, and she's got this thing. I expected at some point she was going to try to make a phone call to the police and her stutter would prevent her from, communicating effectively. And we don't do that. And I was a little surprised.
I was too. I wouldn't necessarily say I was disappointed because then it just turns her stutter into more of like, this is just part of her character as opposed to, oh, we're going to use this in the plot later. Like, nope, this is just part of who she is, which I respect, but I'm also kind of like, but then why do it?
It does feel like maybe this was an earlier draft and we were going to do a disabled woman in danger kind of movie, which, folks, we get plenty of those, but it actually feels a bit more like a 90s thing. So, yeah, this was curious.
Yeah, I mean, with the exception of Wait Until Dark, which is like the 60s, but still, yeah, I mean, look, Copycat, Agoraphobia.
We have one with Marlee Matlin. We have Jennifer 8 with Uma Thurman.
Oh, Mute Witness.
Yes, yeah. And here's the thing. I'm a sucker for those films. I really like them, but I recognize that they're also of a time and they're often made by people who don't really like folks. Once again, you can go and listen to Bodies of Horror with our former guest Nicole Goebel because she does unpack a number of these, but like too often when we introduce disability into especially horror films or thrillers, we just use them as a plot device and we're not actually interested in exploring how the disability makes a person or even how the person doesn't let their disability define them. So in some ways, again, I was like, okay, so she's got a stutter, but it's not the be-all, end-all of who Emily is.
No, not at all. Which, again, so that's the tug-of-war. I'm like, oh, I wish you would have used this more to make things a little bit more suspenseful, but I do think for the most part, it's tastefully handled.
Agreed. Yeah. Which is funny because we should note, like, if you look up this movie, it's Golden Raspberry nominations across the board. Like, people really hated this movie. And then, yes, as you mentioned with Cruising, this movie was heavily picketed and protested by the queer community because, of course, we've got said predatory lesbian.
Well, and the problem is, like, we don't really do a lot of digging into said predatory lesbian psyche. Like, she's just crazy lesbian, crazy because lesbian.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And this truly is like she is acting this way because she is a lesbian who is in love with Emily.
Yes, absolutely.
So as we mentioned, this would be Andrea, and she either lives on the block or near enough that she can swing by because she sees the police leaving Emily's apartment. And at the exact same time, we're introduced to Detective Bob Lufrano, who is played by Joe Cortez. And he is the definition of boring hot male protagonist, like hot for 1980.
Yeah, I have no idea why we are shoehorning in a romance between Bob and Emily in this movie. It feels so out of place.
It's very odd, and yet it's not completely unexpected. Like, we do this a lot. Like, aforementioned Jennifer 8. We've got Andy Garcia investigating Uma Thurman's attack, and he also falls in love with her. So, like, this is standard practice. But I agree with you. It is, I mean, it's super gross because he's in charge of the case. Why are you fucking... Like, he asked this woman out the day after she has been attacked in her apartment. It is so unprofessional.
He cannot read the room. And the fact that this is the end game for the movie, by the way, is mind-boggling to me. Like, excise this character or have Andrea kill him.
Truly, yeah. This movie could stand to have a higher body count.
Which actually, I didn't even think about this because, like, yeah, which I'm surprised I haven't, but, like, the other connection with someone's watching me is that we have two very different portrayals of a lesbian character.
Yeah, because the sort of fun thing about this movie, Windows, is that when we introduce Andrea, I legitimately thought that Emily was getting a divorce because she had feelings for Andrea, and then, you know, they were going to get together, and then it's very clear that it's one-sided and not reciprocal. But I do really appreciate that the film doesn't try to draw this out into, oh, is it going to be the detective who's actually behind things or whatever? Like, we learn pretty early that Andrea is the villain.
Like, I think by the 30-minute mark, we cut to Andrea in her car listening to the tapes the assailant made of Emily. And I thought this was a really neat, like, villain thing where it's like, oh, she gets off on listening to these, like, forced orgasm recordings that this guy made of Emily. Like, so this was all stuff where I was like, this is really fascinating.
Yes, yeah. Like, all of this kind of stuff, I can definitely see why queer people at the time would look at this and say, like, this and motherfucking cruising in one single year?
Yeah.
Fuck everyone in Hollywood. But in hindsight, with like 45 years removed, you know, do I think this is problematic? Absolutely. Do I think it's fascinating? And do I think that this character is a bit of a queer villain icon? Also, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, also bear in mind, this and Cruising come out within 1 month of each other. So this is January of 1980 and Cruising is February of 1980.
Yeah, that's rough, right? Like, if you're not seeing the kind of representation you want or enough of it in general, and then to get 2 of these in the span of 2 months, you're just like, who the fuck is making these movies?
Well, that would be Gordon Willis, former DP of Oscar-winning films like All the President's Men.
Shut up.
I mean, we didn't mention this too, but the writer is a journalist named Barry Siegel.
Yeah, who has like won multiple awards. I was just like, is this linking to the wrong person? Because it's not even listed on his Wikipedia page.
Well, he probably wanted to get rid of it because he won the Pulitzer Prize in 2002, which is, 22 years after this movie. So he's probably like, please scrub that.
Right. It's like Ebert and Valley of the Dolls.
But yes, exactly. Well, yes. The Return. Is it Return to the Valley of the Dolls? Oh, yep, that's it.
Okay, so yes, we're introducing these characters, and you mentioned that you wish Emily had a bit more agency, and I don't disagree, but I do kind of think it's interesting that the day after her attack, she's like, I cannot stay in this apartment. So she goes and she just gets a new one. And she doesn't really tell anybody she puts down a deposit. And then she asks her ex-husband for help moving, and he ghosts her because he's a piece of shit. Also, he needed to come back and get killed.
100%. The way he was talking to her on the phone, he was like, this is really inconvenient right now. Can I not?
And to be fair to a slight character that we don't actually really know or like, it's not as though Emily said anything to him, so he couldn't have known that she was going through this. And Emily clearly is not super great at opening up or confiding in people. I think that's why you're supposed to read Bob as a good romantic match for her, because she feels at ease enough that she will have him over for dinner, go for walks with him, and so on. But like, she clearly has this therapist that she doesn't want to go and see, and Andrea keeps trying to get her to open up. But I don't know. I kind of like that Emily says, I'm just not super comfortable around certain people.
Yeah. Well, I think she is comfortable, though, at a certain point around her neighbors, Ida and Sam Marks, which I could have taken way more scenes between at least Emily and Ida.
Yeah. So these are the kindly neighbors who allow her to use the phone. And we get a little bit of tension. At this point, Emily is distrustful of most men because she just got fucking attacked. And so when the husband says, oh, there's a phone in the lobby that you could have used for like a payphone. And you can see that Emily feels properly chastised, but Ida looks at her husband and is kind of like, shut the fuck up, why are you being like this? And I did really enjoy the relationship between the two women, but you're right, they're not in this movie enough. So even when Sam is revealed to be killed later on, another off-screen death that we don't get to see, I think it's meant to really mean something, but we don't care.
Well, because also we don't even, because Ida winds up going to the hospital and we find out that she's in emergency surgery, but then do we hear about her after that?
Nope, we definitely do not.
Which is funny because when the credits roll, the first credit that pops up is Kay Medford as Ida Marks.
I know, yeah. This was one of those cases where I'm just so far removed from the time period that I don't know if she was a big get or famous for something else.
Yeah, I looked her up because I liked her like performance for the minimal screen time she has. She's done a lot of work throughout the 40s, 50s, and 60s, but she's mostly well known for playing Barbra Streisand's character's mother in Funny Girl.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I guess this probably would have been a bit of a get.
Yeah, a little bit.
All right. Okay, well, why don't we talk about one set piece that did really work for me? So we have to go back and forth between Emily's two apartments because she's moving furniture. And there's this moment where Emily ends up getting a cab and she thinks she recognizes the profile and the voice of the man. And this is Lawrence Hobson. We don't really pronounce his last name, but he's played by Rick Petrocelli. And I mean, this guy is giving super shady from New Jersey kind of performance.
Yeah,
and
who's that actor that's like the guy that plays the guy in the tunnel in Ghost or the subway station?
Oh yeah, I know who you mean, but I don't know the name.
Yeah, it's that guy. He's dead now, but like it's that he reminds me of that guy.
Yeah, just like a very striking character actor kind of deal. And this guy is very scary to the point where Emily keeps calling him Larry instead of Lawrence, even after he corrects her. And I just kept thinking, duck and roll out of this cab and or stop antagonizing him because he's going to fucking kill you.
And it's these moments too where I think Talia Shire's acting ability really comes off because she's doing so much without any dialogue to the point where you mentioned how many Razzies this movie got, and like the fact that Talia Shire was nominated for Worst Actress, that seems like a vendetta against the film, which again, I understand. Talia Shire does not deserve a Worst Actress nomination for this movie.
I mean, neither does Elizabeth Ashley, who was also nominated. Like,
oh, God.
I mean, folks, we're not going to give a ton of weight to the Razzies because they're uniformly pieces of shit and they almost always vote for the wrong people. So it's like, whatever, that's fine. But yeah, I mean, I don't walk away from this movie looking at either of these two lead female performances and say, oh, well, definite contender for worst of the year.
Absolutely. Now, this was, people really like lobbied against this movie. Cool, let's nominate that a bunch.
Exactly. Yeah. Which maybe makes more sense in the time period where people had the pitchforks out for it. But especially now you look at it and you think, no, these are definitely good performances.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing bad. Honestly, the biggest issue with this movie, I think, is the script. Like we already said, like visually, this movie, like you can tell this is made by a cinematographer. Like visually, there's a lot of really good images in here. The performances are solid, but I just think this script is not, it's very shallow.
It's just a bit slow. It's not particularly interested in examining its characters, but it also feels, as you said, like it's a little trepidatious about dipping a toe into more traditional genre water.
100%.
Yeah, but I do like this cab scene, if only because also we develop all this tension. Like you're waiting to see what's going to happen because she's in the cab with him and he's driving. So it's not like there's a way to get away. But then she stops and she says, I just need to make a phone call. And I thought, okay, is she just going to make a run for it and he'll chase her down? But she doesn't. She makes the call. We don't get to hear any of the audio, which I love that touch. And then she gets back in the cab. They keep going. And then she asks him to pull over. And then we arrest him because she had called Bob, obviously.
Yeah. Which, again, that's smart. But it's because you're like, oh, this is happening really early. We're like, we're getting rid of the assailant, but it's because he's the henchman.
Yeah. So we very quickly learn that somebody paid him for this attack, which makes sense. Like, I'll confess, I didn't realize that Andrea was the person who was even in that scene. I thought that it was the female cop who was investigating, like, because we see that Bob has a partner and like it's lit in such a way that it's very atmospheric when she's in the car listening to the tape and like basically jerking off, but we're not showing it. But yeah, once I figured it out, I thought, oh, that's sexy and skeezy. And then we start getting the reveals that Andrea, has rented a loft across the street from Emily's new place and is scoping her out through titular windows, which have no blinds, with like a 3-foot-long telescope.
Yeah, this is where you get your somebody's watching me comparisons because, we do a lot of like across the street telescopic viewing through windows in that movie as well.
But I love it because, we've often joked, and we're not the first people to make this observation, but like in a lot of ladies who like ladies' texts will often get close-ups of like fingers or like hand touching and that kind of stuff. If you keep an eye on the way that Andrea is holding and caressing and touching this telescope as she is looking at Emily, it's like she is basically jerking this telescope off, trying to get her jollies off while watching this woman.
Yes, which again, but it's like done so tastefully because it's like it's a lot of like implication, and we're not just like showing her, like finger herself.
No, of course not.
No, because that would be wrong.
That would be too much. Yeah, okay. So we murder the neighbor, we murder poor Jenny, the orange tabby cat. I'm not going to lie, I definitely anticipated this cat was going to go, especially when it scratches Andrea earlier in the film. You know, insert your own like, oh, Andrea was keeping her pussy. But I did not expect this cat to end up in the fucking freezer.
No. Oh my God.
And that shot of this most surprised looking stuffed cat.
I mean, this is clearly a taxidermy cat. They just stuck in there. But I was like, oh my God.
It's Emily has this shocked reaction, and then the cat fucking falls out and just is laying on the ground.
The fact that it doesn't shatter, though, I was a little disappointed on.
Oh, come on. It couldn't have been in the freezer that long.
I mean, it's frozen.
It is fully fucking frozen. It's kind of hysterical and also upsetting. But I just thought it was so funny because the cops had clearly been in Emily's apartment because we went looking for the neighbor and he had gone in there earlier. Like that was the last place people had seen him. And then his body's found in the basement. Cat is found in the freezer. But it's like, so Andrea left her apartment across the street to come kill this man when she got caught putting the cat in the freezer. But of course, we see none of that.
No. And I think, well, I don't think that's necessarily a problem, but it's like, there's so much happening off screen in this movie. And the fact that we already know it's Andrea, like,
it's a little bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so why don't we talk about their one special night together? Because I definitely thought the movie was going to build to something a little bit more sensational. You know, Andrea lures Emily across the street, and meanwhile, back in her apartment, Bob is frantically trying to put together the cab report as well as who recently bought a high-powered telescope receipts. And it's like, okay, is he going to get to Emily in time? And like, it's very slow burn, but also not threatening because Andrea is in love with Emily, so she's not actually going to hurt her. But they fully spend the night when Emily knows that she paid a man to like sexually assault her, that she's been luring her here under false pretenses, all of this stuff. I liked a lot of where this was going, honestly. I thought the whole climax was mostly good. It was just those final moments that I was like, wait, why aren't we showing... Again, I don't even think... Do we see her getting carted into a police car? No, like we don't even see how it gets resolved. I thought we were going to try to bang down the door or she would find an excuse to extricate herself. But like we basically just build up to the reveal and then we have to sit in the moment. And of course, you know, and of course we've got Elizabeth Ashley just eating the screen with this performance. Like she is so unhinged and wild and it's really, really great. But then it just cuts and it's Emily walking up to Bob on the street being like, I knew she wouldn't hurt me, so it was okay. Let's take a walk across the bridge.
It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, because my favorite part of Ashley's performance here is basically right before we kind of fade out and like in the movie is when she's like, you know, telling Emily, hey, say like basically telling her to make these orgasm sounds. And
yeah, like I know you can make them because I heard them on the tape, and she parrots them to Emily, and the performance is it's erotic and disturbing. Like, I think this is such a magnificent performance just for this scene alone. But yeah, you're like, oh my God, okay, what? Oh, the movie's over.
Well,
okay.
Yeah, and so basically, like Talia Shire's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And she's crying again, giving a really good performance. And then we just fade out. And then we fade into the exterior street. It's like the next morning, and she's talking to Bob, and there's no sign of Andrea anywhere.
No. Presumably she was arrested. Presumably we'll check in with lady neighbor at the ER and so on. But it's very much like, oh, okay, well, don't you feel better that at least this poor lady stutterer has managed to find love with this inappropriate cop? Yay.
Did Emily slap Andrea during this climax, or did I miss that?
She does, yes. So when she's doing all of the parroting and the play acting, like role playing, Emily full on slaps her in the face.
Okay, well, so that's the most catharsis you're going to get from this, unfortunately. Yes. Which again, it's like, why aren't we having this kind of like scuffle, like this final brawl between the two of them? Nope, we just decide to fade out. Okay.
Yeah, it truly, this was the moment where I realized, oh, we are so actively resisting the genre moniker that we can't descend into traditional violence. Like, the opening attack is actually the most physically threatening part of this film.
Yes, and actually, a slight tangent, but we haven't mentioned that the score for this movie was done by Ennio Morricone.
Oh, it's a pretty good score.
I think,
You disagree?
Well, I don't remember any of it.
Okay.
so I can't even tell you, like, oh, yeah, it's good or it's bad. I don't remember. I guess I didn't remember it.
There's kind of like a smooth, like a saxophone-y kind of jazz vibe in all of the romantic scenes with Emily and Bob. It feels a little soapy, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
And I can't recall the more thrillery parts, but
this is because there are, I mean, like, with the exception of that opening assault, there aren't really because even the climax, I think, is done a little bit more like the music. If I remember correctly, it sounds a little bit more romantic.
Yeah, because we are trying to lean into that.
Yeah.
It's wild because part of this is that Andrea, like all of her interactions with her therapist, who she eventually kills, but we don't see it. We just see a bloody handprint on the glass. The big thing that he's trying to get her to do is vocalize what she wants. And I think in his mind, he's saying, why don't you go talk to Emily and say, I have romantic feelings for you. And her interpretation of that is, I'm going to recreate the sexual assault tape that I made some guy make you do at the beginning of this. And that will be me outing myself as a person who wants to fuck you.
Yeah, makes total logical sense. But
totally, yeah.
You can wave that away because she is quite literally a bit insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I surprised that people were up in arms about this film, like members of the queer community? No, not at all.
No.
But as I said, with 45 years distance, we can look back on this and say, yeah, like this fucking diva came out and slayed. Is it offensive still? I would say yes, but only because the film really has no interest in her, apart from the fact that she's a really scary queer lady.
Yeah, because we've said many times, it's okay to have a queer villain, by all means. Sure. Like, it's totally believable based on how society treats queer people that some people would be villainous. But yeah, there's no work done to develop the Andrea character at all.
No, like, we have no idea about her psychology. All we know is that she is obsessed with Emily, and she has done all of these things to get this woman into her apartment.
Just really going the long way around. She's taking the scenic route to get this.
Truly, yeah. Like queer people, just come clean to your crushes. You don't need to rent a whole second apartment and buy an expensive telescope. You just don't.
Maybe in 1980 you did.
Well, that is fair.
But yeah, everyone, that is Windows. We've gone a little long for a micro-queers, but I mean, there was just a lot of stuff to talk about here, clearly.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, well, we hope you enjoyed this. If you watched it, if you didn't, I don't know, seek it out and see what you think. But until next time, we can cross out a Windows.
Indeed, and cross out micro-queers.